So it's hard for me to call Doge an example of fascism. But if you wanted to make the argument that maybe Trump has a style of leadership with the government that's more fascistic, I think you could make that argument. So, but I just don't think that Doge is a good example of that.
Our Constitution, our founding documents, everything that is so American doesn't say we the people for nothing.
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode 200 of the Removing Barriers podcast. And in this episode, we will be celebrating 200 episodes of Removing Barriers. And also looking at Trump, Musk, and DOGE. And co-hosting with us in this episode is Sam.
Hi, this is Jay. MCG and I would like for you to help us remove barriers by going to removingbarriers.net and subscribing to receive all things Removing Barriers. If you'd like to take your efforts a bit further and help us keep the mics on, consider donating at removingbarriers.net/donate. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross.
All right. Before we jump into the topic at hand, Sam, Jay, I'm going to put you on the spot. Let's start with you, Sam. What is your favorite episode of all 199 episodes that we have done thus far?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a tough one. Okay, so there's one episode that jumps out, but unfortunately, I haven't listened to it yet, but I want to. And that's related to, I think you had an episode on Brahmanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to listen to that one. So,
but it can't be your favorite. You haven't listened to it yet.
Yeah, well, so I hate to say that because my real favorite, and it's probably because of the topic, but it seems a little self-serving. See, it sounds so bad. I'm choking up trying to say it. is the episode about the history of abortion and the Nazis, and it was a podcast with me and my brother. So it sounds a little self-serving to say that's my favorite, but that topic is one that's very important to me. So that's kind of why that one jumps out.
Cool. What about you, Jay?
That is a tough one.
Well, you have been on every episode and listened to every episode, so.
That's true. It's hard to pick a single one, but the On the Mission Field episode with the Farringer family was one that sticks out to me. They were the ones heading to Chile, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how can I say that was my favorite? Because I also like the one that we did. I shouldn't say I like it, but the one that I thought was perhaps consequential because it was about something that was happening right at that moment was the one about Derek Chauvin and the conviction and the sentencing that he experienced. Because the whole thing with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin was what kicked off the summer of love nonsense that we're subjected to, or that we had to endure as a country. Back in, what was that, 2020, I think it was, or 2019, 2020? 2020. Another one that I really like. Oh, I can only pick one?
I didn't say that, but we did say favorite, though. We didn't say favorites.
Okay. Then I will have to go with On the Mission Field with the Farringer family then.
Okay, cool.
If I may, I actually have another one that I kind of like.
Go ahead.
And that is the one on polygamy. I'm trying to remember which episode. I think it was 184, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Okay. Yeah. And I remember that one because, Alyssa and I, my wife, that is, we're doing a Bible study here in town, and we're trying to get people from the neighborhood involved and whatnot. And one of the issues that kind of popped up maybe a week or two before your podcast was polygamy and whether it was acceptable in Christian society or by Christian standards, whether it was okay, I guess, in the Bible or whatnot under the New Testament. And it kind of surprised me because that question kept popping up in our Bible studies. And I don't even really think it was a topic in the passages that we were studying that much, but it's just like folks were thinking about it, you know, and really struggling. So that podcast was really helpful in dealing with that issue with the people that were asking those questions. And I think it helped because I feel like they were asking the question because they were actually honestly entertaining the idea a little bit. And I think, that podcast covered, I believe it was a missionary, and he lived in a society where polygamy was legal.
Right.
And he was giving examples of how that turns out, and it doesn't turn out so great,
Right.
So I think that helped them deal with what they were thinking about. So I appreciated that, and I wanted to mention that. I don't think I ever talked to you about that, but
Yeah, we
that
haven't spoke about
podcast
that.
was helpful.
Yeah. Missionary Scott is an avid listener, so I think he would enjoy hearing you saying that. So
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
Another one I think I want to poke in there as well. We had, I don't remember what number it was, but it was with Delano Squires, and it talked about Christians using pronouns and how to address that matter. To me, that was a really important one, because when you're at the door and you're engaging with someone, or someone comes to your church and they are steeped in the ideology of the day, how do we as Christians, how are we supposed to react with love, but also holding on to truth? That's something I think more and more Christians are going to have to fess up with, because, the gospel is still marching forward. People in the LGBTQIA mafia are going to get saved. And so when they come to your church with the ideology and the scarring that comes with it, how are we supposed to engage with them? How do we love them and teach them and disciple them and deal with the very specific issues that, they bring to the table? I think that was very helpful.
Cool. All right. So, Sam, we have 200 episodes and actually 3 bonus episodes. How many episodes do you think you have been a part of out of 200 episodes?
Oh, wow.
Putting you on the spot.
I'm going to say somewhere between 3 and 5.
That you have joined us?
Yeah.
No, you're not even close.
Really?
Yeah. According to my count, you have been with us for 10 episodes.
What? Really?
And this is your 11th episode, actually.
Oh, wow.
That means you have been with us for 5% of the episodes we have done.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thanks for having me.
Now, MCG, you didn't get to say what your favorite episode
Well, I
was.
can't say any favorite because it's like choosing your favorite kid.
That's a cheap answer.
Out of Sam's kids, I do have a favorite, but out of my kids, I don't have a favorite.
You
Okay,
still
what's
have
your
to
favorite
pick.
topic?
Yeah, you still have
Does
to
that
pick
work better?
something.
Oh, my favorite topic. That's hard for me still, but I'm going to go with a favorite series because I do like their testimonies and interviewing the missionaries. I do like
Yeah,
those.
those are great. But that's still cheating, though, because that's not
The
one.
bunkers is nice, but I don't think I like it as much as I like the salvation testimonies and the missionary experiences. But I can't choose a favorite because I'm the one who contact everybody and everything. So,
You see how it is, Sam? Rules for thee and not for me. So we had to pick one on the spot.
but if I choose one,
Right.
and the listener now hear, oh, this guy contacted me about that podcast, and I'm not his favorite. They're all my favorite.
Oh, okay. I guess that's a diplomatic
Okay,
answer.
fair enough. A way to get out of that one.
Uh-huh.
I know. All right. So in celebration of 200 episodes, we're doing a giveaway of multiple gifts. All you have to do is be a part of our subscribe member mailing list. If you're not a subscribe member, simply go to removingbarriers.net and there you'll find multiple ways to subscribe. If you subscribe, check your email for details on how to win one of the many gifts up for grab. Rules and regulation apply, of course. All right, well, let's jump into it. Let's start out by just kind of explaining what is the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE?
I think that we're going to have a hard time actually defining the Department of Government Efficiency, because the ones that are opposed to it say that it's one thing, while the ones that instituted it and the ones that support it say it's something else.
Well, what is it officially, though?
Okay, officially, DOGE is the Department of Government Efficiency. It is what should we call this? Should we call it a task force? Should we call it
Initiative?
an initiative? It was established by executive order, and the whole point of DOGE is to identify, root out, and stop wasteful government spending in order to help rectify the deficit. There's almost $2 trillion deficit, if I'm not mistaken, 1.8 or something $trillion deficit that America's running right now. It is headed by Elon Musk, although that is strongly refuted. And so the concern for a lot of people is that this is unconstitutional. It's more of a fascist sort of thing going on, where you have government working hand in hand with a business or
A billionaire?
well, okay. So this is where it gets confusing. Multi-billionaire. And one of the most consequential billionaires. He's not just a billionaire for being a billionaire's sake. This is the man who established PayPal and SpaceX and Tesla. He's a real heavyweight, both in Silicon Valley, all around the world. And he's one of the very few who took a stand against the woke insanity that we had to endure back in 2020. And everyone that's on the left or everyone that is ideologically opposed to him hates him for it. Even though DOGE is doing a good thing, the fact that it's headed by Elon Musk is a reason why people oppose it. But he says that he is not running it. He's only in an advisory role to the president, and the president is the one making all of the calls on what gets cut and what doesn't. So there's a lot of back and forth about what DOGE is, what DOGE is doing, whether or not it's effective. But I suppose a very simplified answer is it's an initiative or a task force established by executive order by President Trump in January of 2025 in order to identify and cut federal spending in order to address the almost $2 trillion deficit that America has right now.
Yeah, I would say so. What about you, Sam? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the question about the constitutionality of Musk running or being at the top level of DOGE, I don't see an issue there, at least not based off of established law or case law.
They're saying it violates the appointments clause of the Constitution is their argument.
Well, and I think the counter argument is that Elon Musk is a special government employee who, as far as I understand it, it's been accepted that they're allowed to be put in place, but it's only for a time limit. I want to say it's about 120 days or so.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And last I knew that hadn't expired, although I think it's getting close.
Yeah, it's going to expire sometime in May.
Okay. As long as the special government employee is actually constitutionally accepted, I know that's a position that we have recognized politically for a while. And I haven't looked into whether that is constitutionally valid or not, but it's not like it's been so controversial in the past. I think it's more controversial now all of a sudden.
Well, it's controversial because of Trump, but...
Well, the appointments clause says that if you're appointing someone, like an inferior officer, someone that can be hired and fired at will, that's not an issue. You don't need the Congress to get involved. But if you're appointing someone to run a particular outfit, which they're arguing that Musk is doing, then that appointment needs to go through Congress. That's what they're saying. But Musk is saying, hey, I'm not running the thing. I'm just advising the president. And yet when DOGE actually does anything, and we can see it both de facto and many other ways, it does seem to get his final mark of approval before it gets cut. So
whose final mark, Trump or Musk?
Musk.
Gotcha.
But that doesn't necessarily say he's running it, though. That means he's in a advisory role and they want to go to him before, because I guess he's the one who will take it to the president.
Okay, so then the question is, then who's running DOGE? And did Congress approve that? If Musk isn't running it, then
ultimately would be the president.
Yeah, I think that's a hard one to prove, right? Because if Musk says, let's cut this, and then like, oh, Musk, you can't do that. It has to be the president. And then the president says, well, yes, I want this cut. Then, like, to me, it's almost kind of pointless argument,
right.
You know?
Mm.
If Musk does something that Trump doesn't want, Trump can fire him. So I don't see what the big, like, maybe there's a technicality where you can try to attack it, but ultimately it looks to me right now that Trump is going to back Musk and Musk is doing what Trump wants. So whether it's Trump giving the final go ahead or Musk, who really cares? You know, in a way.
Oh, that's true.
Well, even if they wanted to do something about it, they really can't. The Democrats are in complete disarray right now. So they're pretty much grasping at straws, trying to throw whatever they can at the wall to see what sticks. And of course, a lot of people make the argument that because USAID and all of these other wasteful spending entities were just honeypots for a whole bunch of people, not just in this country, but also in other countries. That's probably why they're fighting back so hard against it. Not because they're against what DOGE is about, but it simply hurts their pockets. And so, of course, they're going to make a stink. Too bad they're not organized and strong enough to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking back about who's the final one to say yes or no. I mean, ultimately, I think Musk is doing what Trump wants. But if this is a technicality that must be satisfied, maybe Trump should give Elon Musk his auto pin, and then we don't have to worry about anything.
We're not going to get there, Sam. What was DOGE established to do, and what are some of the accomplishments you will say that you have seen thus far? Of course, all of us have been following the news, but what are some of the accomplishments that maybe stood out to you, and some of the things that they've done thus far? You say, wow, yeah, I didn't know that. I'll start with you, Sam.
I think one of DOGE's biggest accomplishments that kind of surprised me a little bit, although maybe not too much, is related to USAID.
Yeah, that was
And
huge.
yeah, what's going on there? And I guess for the sake of the audience, with USAID, what it looks like is we were sending a lot of money, billions of money, to different countries. A lot of times we would use examples of underdeveloped countries or poor countries that may need things like food and medicine or help with their government or whatever, stuff like that. So we'd send a lot of money supposedly to help these people. And I remember during the Biden administration seeing that a lot of this money was connected to LGBTQIA plus type stuff. In fact, a lot of governments in Africa were complaining about it. Like, we don't want this LGBT garbage, right? We don't want that, but they need food and medicine or other stuff. So it puts them in a tough spot. Some of the countries said, no, we're not taking it. And others said, fine, we'll go along with this agenda that was being pushed by Biden or whoever was really operating behind the scenes there in that administration. Well, Elon Musk uncovered, I guess, more details showing how far or how crazy some of this stuff was. Some of it was not so necessarily insidious. I guess stuff like Sesame Street. We spent, I want to say, what was it, 26? I'm just pulling it off the top of my head here. I want to say it was somewhere in the order of about $26 million or something for some Sesame Street program in Iraq.
Did we figure out how to get there, by the way?
Did we figure out what?
Did we figure out how to get to Sesame Street?
Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure there is a Sesame Street in Iraq, but so maybe we should have spent more money to build the street. I don't know. But yeah, we're just spending money on all these programs. Some of them, it's like, why? I mean, I can see it being nice, but this is U.S. money. Shouldn't it be for the U.S. taxpayer? And then other things, like I said, the whole LGBTQIA plus, like, we don't need to promote that. I know, coming from a Christian conservative standpoint, like, that's appalling, right? That we would be forcing this down other people's throat. I don't want to force it down our throat, right? Why are we going to force it down the rest of the world? And then the other thing, and maybe this is more the surprising area that I wasn't paying close attention to, is all the kickbacks. So it seems like a lot of Doge money would go out through not Doge, a lot of USAID money would go out supposedly to help these countries. But for whatever reason, it would always seem to go back to some company or to some account that was somehow tied in to the politicians who approved the money, right? And Elon Musk was starting to look into that. And a lot of the Democrats, and honestly, I think there are some Republicans that should probably be a little nervous about those kind of investigations. But ultimately, I want to say a lot of USAID money has been cut, last I understood.
Yeah.
And they screamed about that, so.
Yeah, I think what jumped out to me with USAID would be the NGOs. I knew of them, but I didn't know that it run as deep as it did. And non-government organizations, so a lot of money goes to that. And as you say, it is through those companies, non-government organizations, that many of the money come back into, who knows, politicians or whoever that enrich themselves through it. But
they enrich themselves through these charitable foundations, so-called charitable foundations. And it's just a front for laundering money. Do you really need a certain million number of dollars in order to provide services and things to other countries that don't even believe in what you're giving them? No, it's obviously they're laundering the money. And so to have the U.S. be behind that, I think every American should find that unacceptable. But the problem is, we're not very much informed about what our government is doing. I'll give a very distinct example. For many, 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 many decades, the U.S. has been involved with, if not the U.S., we'll say companies that have contacts within the U.S. government that will enable them to facilitate operations in other countries that would be questionable or illegal otherwise. And these foundations, these NGOs, these businesses, these whatever you want to call them, they destabilize other countries to the point where people are fleeing these countries. Haiti is a perfect example of that. Our involvement in many of the Middle Eastern countries is an example of that. And our government is either directly supporting that or by proxy, whether it's supporting government businesses that are operating in a shady fashion like that. And I would imagine most Americans don't want their money spent that way. The problem is we don't know anything about it. And so I think that if DOGE did nothing else, bringing that out to light for the American people to understand and to see so that they can vote according to what they are able to find out. That in itself is worth its weight in gold. If DOGE does nothing else, it's done a really great thing.
Well, I'm not quite sure that's new, though, because the U.S. have been using the power of the purse for years, decades, to persuade other countries to do their things. Even before DOGE, we know of them pumping money into Pakistan to forcing the government there to accept whether it's LGBTQIA or whether it is democracy or whatever the case may be. This is nothing new for the U.S. The U.S. have always used the power of the purse to persuade poorer countries to say, hey, in order for you to get aid or anything from the U.S., we have to do this. And many of the countries kind of on paper will acquiesce, but in culture and practice will not. And that's where the fraud, waste, and abuse come into play, because the money keep on going, but there never is any change, because the culture of those countries is not going to change because the U.S. want them to change. You know, of course, we as Christians will say that true change will come when the heart is changed to Jesus Christ, not through the money. But also I want to add that, you know, some of the findings recently, I think they find the unused or unneeded credit cards. And they said there are now 4.6 million active credit cards that's issued to the U.S. government. 4.6 million active credit cards. That is after DOGE has canceled some 470,000 cards. Just let that kind of blow your mind for a little bit. So there's 4.6 million active credit cards that is tied to the U.S. federal government bank account. And DOGE,
I can kind of vouch for that too.
And DOGE closed 470,000 and 4.6 million remain.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow. Again, I think I can say this. I have been a federal contractor for most of my career as a software engineer. And I remember I was creating a new application and we needed to integrate with a third-party API. And this is a paid service. So we had to get someone to put their credit card on this service so we can use it. And the government employee gave me a credit card that was tied to the U.S. government. But I must say that one of the reasons why I'm surprised of this is because he was on this like a hawk. Every time a transaction is made, he will contact me and say, hey, I see this happen. Can we change? I think at that point we were doing like per minute. So every time we use a service, they charge us. And say, can we change it to a monthly billing or whatever the case may be? And he was pretty much all over it on the credit card. So I'm surprised that there would be this much abuse on it when it's something that can be monitored so easily. Another thing, of course, again, mentioned that I'm a federal contractor. I've been for most of my career. Wasteful contracts. DOGE have closed many as 10,000 contracts, which have saved over $900 million.
What, say that again?
So over 10,000 contracts have been closed.
Only 10,000? All
canceled.
of them are all of them together? 900 million?
Over 900 million. They're worth over 900 million.
Wow.
And of course, we mentioned USAID as ready. And of course, if you go to doge.gov, they make a list of everything that they've done and whatever they've closed and money they have saved and stuff like that. And most of these I got from doge.gov. So these numbers may have changed from when I pulled these numbers, but basically the credit cards and the contracts. Simon, you're also a federal contractor.
I am, yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen it, but I have seen federal contracts where the federal government don't even know what they want.
Yeah.
And for months we're there and we're trying to help them figure out what they want and why the reason why they hire us and what they want exactly want us to do. And I'll tell you this one, I was on a contract some time ago and the federal government was paying us to do some research. And the federal government already knew what they wanted, but they wanted us to do the research to tell them to choose the one that they wanted. And when we didn't choose the one that they wanted, it wasn't really sitting well for them or for us, because now they don't have a finger to point to and say that, hey, the contractor has chose it, because they already chose it. So they paid us, waste government money, instead of saying, hey, we want this, go and build something for us using this. Rather they say, hey, go and research all these things and come back, but we really want this one. That's waste. And I'm in agreement, even though I have some issues with DOGE, I'm in agreement with at least cutting that part out, at least running it a little bit more like a business where if the value is not there, get rid of it. But anyways. I guess the question is, though, is there any precedent for Doge? What would you say are some of the precedent for Doge, if you think there's a precedent for it?
Yeah, so there's a few, I guess you could say, precursors, if you will, to Doge. One that jumps out to me right away is not here in America, but it's in Argentina, Javier Milei, and his campaign to cut wasteful spending, fraud, and government corruption, right? Argentina, just a little bit ago, they had what was essentially becoming a rather socialistic type government, and I want to say their economy was really in trouble. I want to say that they were running somewhere around 200% inflation every year or something like that. I need to double check that, but their inflation was out of control. Let's see, Argentina inflation. Just trying to double check some numbers here. But their inflation rates were really bad, and a lot of it had to do with government spending. And so Javier Milei, he ran for president. This is just a few years ago, and maybe just like a year and a half.
Yeah, I think
or
it's
so
just a year ago.
Yeah. And so anyway, he ran for president saying that he was going to cut wasteful government spending. And wow, I'm looking at this.
Is he the one to go, a waiver?
Afuera.
Afuera. Yeah.
Well, of course, my Spanish is no good.
Yeah, that's the one.
So anyway, yeah. And it sounds like the economy's starting to turn around a little bit in Argentina, last I had heard. And so, but he did it by cutting a lot of wasteful spending. And I mean, he cut many thousands of government jobs, and there was a lot of screaming, but it looks like it may turn out pretty good in Argentina in the end. And I think that some of Doge was inspired by Milei's actions, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you could also even look at like one of the latest CPAC events was in Texas or so when Javier Milei came in. This is just maybe a month or two ago. And he gifted Elon Musk a chainsaw like the one that he had when he was campaigning for president of Argentina. So there's an example right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to say there's similar things in the United States government before where we had like inspector general positions as well as, I'm trying to remember the term. Let's see, we had a government accountability office and office of inspector general, and they kind of help supposedly police our expenses and whatnot, but really, it's just another government agency that is interested in seeing a larger government,
Right.
So, but in the case of Elon Musk, he may actually be interested in seeing the debt cut because he's actually America's biggest taxpayer. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, I want to say he has the record for the most taxes paid by any individual to the federal government. So,
well, why don't we ask, we know that Trump, Musk, and the right wing would say, of course, they're precedent for Doge. But what about the leaders of the left? Well, let's ask Obama back in 2011 and Joe Biden also back in 2011. Let's see what they have to say about government efficiency back then.
Everyone knows that getting rid of the deficit will require some tough decisions. And that includes cutting back on billions of dollars in programs that a lot of people care about. But what should be easy is getting rid of the pointless waste and stupid spending that doesn't benefit anybody. Waste we should be getting rid of even if we didn't have a deficit. Sure, some of these cuts aren't that big, but no amount of waste is acceptable. Not when it's your money. Not at a time when so many Americans are already cutting back. Just as families are living within their means, government should too. Did you know the federal government pays for a website devoted to a folk music ensemble made up of forest rangers? They're called the Fiddlin' Foresters. I'll put their music on my iPod, but I'm not paying for their website. And there are hundreds of similar sites that we should consolidate or just get rid of. And by the way, you're not only paying for websites no one needs, you're paying for thousands of buildings all across the country no one uses. For the last decade, the government's owned a massive and completely empty warehouse in the middle of Brooklyn, for example. Now, the government hadn't been able to sell this building and others like it because of red tape and Washington politics that held things up for years. But we're finally cutting through all that and plan to get rid of these buildings in the months ahead. We need to step up our game. We need to go after every dime. We need to make government work for you. That's why, starting today, I've asked the Vice President to lead a renewed effort to hunt down misspent tax dollars in every agency and department of this government. We're calling it the Campaign to Cut Waste, and I know Joe's the right man to lead it, because nobody messes with Joe.
There's a new...
All right, so that's Obama talking about...
Did Joe Biden say there's a noose?
No, there's a news, I think, but I'm going to play what Joe Biden's going to say. But if you notice, Obama was advocating for DOGE long before we had a DOGE, right?
Yes.
All right. And this is Joe Biden when he was coherent, not when he was... not the Joe Biden of last year, but the Joe Biden of 2011. I shall continue.
There's a new standard by which the government is going to function from this point on. The American people are entitled to transparency. Look, a lot of this depends on new, sophisticated methods, but it also, we know, depends on relentless focus on making this a priority. Focus that can't be delegated. We're holding ourselves accountable, and we're deeply committed and focused on making government function better. We're not just eliminating fraud and waste. We hope to be instilling an entire new culture that not only our administration, but every succeeding administration will in fact pursue. We're going to give you the government you expect and deserve.
All right, Jay, what do you have to say about your former president, Obama, and Joe Biden?
I'd like to go back and see how much of the government they actually cut, because otherwise it just sounds like lip service to me. It sounds like they're saying what they ought to have said, what they know everyone wants to hear, but I don't think there was any teeth to what they were saying. I don't think any of it actually happened, because government has gotten bigger every single year from its inception. Really? I mean, I guess you could point to a few years in its history where it hasn't gotten bigger, but after the crash of 29, government exploded and it hasn't stopped. And I don't think they did anything to actually address it. Now Trump is actually addressing it, or his second administration is actually addressing it, and it's all a problem, only because the wrong people are saying something about it.
All right, I think you're not the nail on the head there. I think it's not what is being done, it's who's doing it. Sam, you comment on your former president?
You talk about Obama?
Obama and Joe.
I mean, I've heard some of these. I don't think I heard it from Joe Biden, but I want to say I've heard similar things from Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. But I do have to say that I'm a little surprised to hear the clip that you just played with Obama and Joe Biden. Like Jay was saying, it sounds very good. You know, I'm a little surprised. But I think, like she was also saying, to me, it sounds like, I mean, if we just look at what actually happened, I don't know whether it's intentional or not, but they did not accomplish what they stated there. And I guess I have to wonder, especially looking at all the corruption and looking at Joe Biden's administration that has just passed, it makes me think that maybe there was not much intent to cut these expenses, especially because Biden has, or people in Biden's orbit have really benefited from corruption in the government. And it's well documented when you look at things like what went on in, what's the country called? They're warring with Russia right now. Ukraine.
Yeah.
When you look at what happened in Ukraine with Burisma and several of the business associates, Hunter Biden, when you look at Joe Biden's brother, James, I want to say, like they made out pretty good from that. And even Joe Biden himself, because
allegedly,
you have that.
We don't want to be sued, allegedly.
Allegedly, yes. But I mean, there are documents on Hunter Biden's laptop that has been confirmed by the FBI where they refer to the big guy and giving a cut to the big guy. And I want to say those documents, and maybe this is more the alleged part because I don't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure that the laptop did explain who the big guy was in other documents. But the laptop that describes corrupt business dealings, you know, the FBI has confirmed the laptop and the contents on it that has been discussed on many conservative channels. So for me, it's funny that we would say, it's, you know, some government agencies say, oh, well, maybe it's Russian disinformation, but our government has confirmed it. And this is before Trump was president even.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of corruption going on in Ukraine, and a lot of it's happening through government spending. And so it's hard for me to think that Biden really meant that he wanted. A lot of that corruption, by the way, happened during Obama's term. I totally forgot about that. Because the whole Burisma stuff, that was back in, I want to say, 2014 is when a lot of that stuff happened. And that's during Obama's term.
Yeah, his
So,
second term, yeah.
Well, okay.
so it is just lip service. Biden had no interest in, he had the opposite of interest in cutting those
Well,
wasteful
Or are they playing
programs.
4D chess in some way? So, for example, the Democratic platform is one that seems to be pro-immigration, whether legal or illegal. And Obama was known as the deporter in chief. He deported so many more people than Trump did or whoever, or Biden did in any of their, well, Trump's first administration and Biden's administration. So is there a game that they're playing where they're saying one thing and doing another?
Yeah.
Like they know what needs to be done, but they have to say the publicly pleasing thing. Is that what's going on here instead? Or
Well, the game is called politics.
well, yeah.
And this is exactly what I hate about politics. Because if you
Yeah.
go back far enough, and of course, I have to do a lot of research when it comes to these episodes to find clips and stuff like that. And you don't have to look deep to find Nancy Pelosi agreeing with building a wall. You don't have to look far to find clips where Hillary Clinton agrees with deportation and legal immigration and hates, detests illegal immigration. You don't have to look far to find clips of these people talking about doing it the right way. You just have to go back a few years. Kamala Harris went to Nicaragua and tell them, don't come. So you don't have to go too far to find clips of these people saying one thing, but they allow the other. And this is the same for Obama and Joe. To some extent, I believe they meant what they say back in 2011 here about government waste, fraud, and abuse and cutting it out. They just didn't have the political will to do it, because if they had done it, quite honestly, the Republicans would have been giving them the same treatment that the Democrats are giving DOGE right now. It's all politics. Anyways, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I guess for me, the other question is, I don't know about Obama so much, but I remember Joe Biden, he was under fire for some of his deportations. He was deporting Christians. So he was allowing people coming in from all over South and Central America, Mexico. He was letting them come in illegally. He was allowing a lot of gang members, Tren de Agua, and then there were gangs, unfortunately, from Haiti and other Caribbean islands. I love the Caribbean islands, but a lot of these were bad folks, right, that were coming in. And whether they were bad or not, they were still coming in illegally. But then there were Christians coming in seeking asylum from persecution, and Joe Biden would send them out immediately, right? Very quickly, he would send Christians seeking asylum. But people that were gangbangers, or it seems to me, people that are more likely to vote in a liberal fashion, he was allowing in. And so maybe it's not that he's just doing what needs to be done for the country, but maybe he's doing what needs to be done to secure Democrat votes in the future.
Yeah, probably. As I say, it's all politics. But I have another clip here. Here is Elon Musk. And imagine you dub this over what Obama just said and see if they're not saying the same thing.
There's been a tremendous amount of waste and fraud in the government during the Biden administration, which estimated the federal government fraud to be $500 billion. What we're trying to do is get that number down to a much smaller figure, save money for the American taxpayer, stop money being spent on things that I think very few taxpayers would agree make sense. Transgender animal surgeries, or why are the 20 million people who are definitely dead marked as alive in the Social Security database?
Wasn't that the same thing Obama was saying back in 2011? This was Elon Musk this year.
The wrong person saying it. That's all it boils down to.
Yeah, I would agree. Anything to add, Sam?
To me, it's the wrong person saying it. And again, you have one person who says it, or a few people, Obama and Biden, they're saying it. So they're the right people because they're Democrats. So, okay, yay, we cheer on our team. But in addition, I think it's okay because they know that it's going to help them politically to say it. And they're not actually going to do anything of consequence about it, Whereas when Elon Musk talks about it, they know, when Elon Musk or when Trump talks about it, they know that there's a good chance that Elon Musk or Trump actually intends on doing something about it. And I think that's where the real issue were. If Trump were to talk about it and never do anything, or if he were to talk to them in the back rooms, hey, don't worry, I'm going to talk about it a lot, but nothing's ever really going to happen, I think they would calm down. But the problem is they know he's going to do something, or at least he's going to give it a good try anyway.
So is the action there against not the talking about it? Because we guess the argument can be made that Obama was all talk, no action. But I'll give Obama this too, because I do remember the news cycle when he was talking about that, especially the unused buildings for the federal government. And I think he did do something about that. But anyways, I have Greg Gutfeld. Here's another precedent that we haven't discussed yet.
To the monologue. This week, DOGE perfectly exposed government bureaucracy in a nutshell. While working on the IRS website, DOGE...
And I think you might be able to identify with this, Sam. This is about software engineering.
Okay.
I have a lot to say about it, but I'm going to let Gutfeld finish.
Noticed the site's login button wasn't in the top right, like most websites. It's a small thing, but DOGE noted it was weirdly placed in the middle of the page. So DOGE wanted to move it to the right spot. But an IRS engineer said the soonest they could do that was July 21st, over 100 days from now. So what did DOGE do? They stepped in and fixed it in 70 minutes. Here's how it looks now. See, there it is. They moved it from the middle to the top. It's a small thing, yeah, but the government would have needed 100 days to do it. To go from there to there. So imagine how long it takes for them to do stuff that actually requires more effort. This is how the government works. Hey, Steve, can we change the website a little? No problem, Joe. I'll have to submit a work order for that, which requires approval from the boss, and then we'll circle back at the monthly meeting for the next round of approvals. Then we'll hire a contractor to hire a subcontractor that will hire a teenager to make the change. Total cost of John Q. taxpayer, $60 billion. But hyperventilated. But when it's no longer on the taxpayer's dime, it gets done in minutes. See, this is why you need Elon and DOGE. A government website shouldn't be harder than translating Jasmine Crockett into English. Wow. And this week, DOGE uncovered millions of taxpayer dollars of unemployment insurance claims for people who haven't been born yet, over the age of 115, and even between the ages of 1 and 5.
All right, so that's Gutfeld. I have a lot to say on it, Sam, but I'm going to let you go first.
That's a new one. I've not heard of it taking 100 and something days to move a login button. You know, because we're web developers, I'm trying to think, is there a technical reason for that? Why would... And of course, I mean, at first glance, you'd say absolutely not. I can't think of a technical reason. So then he's talking about the whole contracting process. And it's like, well, maybe that could slow things down quite a bit. But that's pretty ridiculous. I mean, just when it comes to writing the code, should be... And I guess DOGE proved it because they changed it pretty quick, didn't they? So...
Well, you're a software engineer, you should know. But, you know, the sad part of all this, what Gutfeld said, he's not wrong. I wish he was wrong, but I have experienced things that are so similar to that is crazy. I can give you example over example over example throughout my career as a government contractor where we had a simple thing to change and we cannot touch the code because it needs to go through some sort of channel. I remember my very first job, we were generating letters. These were using something called Pro-C code.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to try to get too technical, but Pro-C is basically C programming with Oracle headers. So you can easily interact with the Oracle database using the C code.
Interesting.
So basically, you create your application writing C code, then you go through your make file and regenerate or whatever the case it may be, and it spit out a bunch of letters that the company, I'm not going to divulge much of what it is, but the company can now send these letters out to the appropriate parties. The format on the letter was wrong. And I caught it in UAT, which is basically user acceptance testing. I said, hey, can I change it really quickly before we push this to production? No, they had a meeting, Sam. They had to talk about money because the deadline was coming up and there was no money in whatever for us to go back and change a formatting change. I went and changed it. It took me 5 minutes or less to make the change in development on my personal computer. All thing I had to do was to push the code so it goes to quality assurance, then to UAT. It will take probably an hour, depends on how we want to run it. They had to have meetings after meetings after meetings, drag me into this meeting, to that meeting. And finally, the one day say, hey, how long do you think you can do it? I'm like, it's done. All thing I had to do is push the code. Why all this?
Yeah.
I have other stuff that I can tell you. I can tell you of times when we want to put a banner on the website. But he has to go all the way up to the lawyers. And in order to get to the lawyers, he has to go through the program manager. And the program manager has to go to his boss. And then go to that boss. Then the lawyers come back and say, okay, don't use this verbiage, or whatever the case may be. And it takes you months just to change a text on a web page. So it's government bureaucracy. Sad part about it is true. To move a button from the middle of the page to the right corner of a page will take a qualified software engineer 2 minutes to do. Yet it takes months because designers have to look at it, developers have to look at it, the IT PM has to look at it, this person has to look at it, and everybody has to get some approval. Sadly,
well,
go ahead.
No, I mean, you're right, because we have, and I don't know how things work out in your situation. In my case, a lot of the contracts are a lot more lenient. So if I need to make a change to the sites that I work on, for the most part, I can make a change and it's not that big of a deal. So in my case, like our contract is ongoing, right? And we renew it every 5 years. And so I can make changes whenever, as long as I get like a local government. He's like almost like an immediate supervisor over me on the government side. As long as he signs off on it, I can push it to production and it's not that big of a deal. But when we're transitioning from, let's say, one project to another, and let's say one project's about to shut down and then I need to make changes, but it's not covered in the contract for whatever reason, then it's a huge problem. Because like you said, we have to get lawyers involved and they're expensive and take time sometimes. And then we have to write up a whole new document for the requirements to make this one change.
Yep.
And then, of course, we have things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we have to make sure that whatever changes we do.
508?
Yeah, exactly. So for those who don't know, that involves things like making sure that your website is good for colorblind people, and also that works with text readers or like website, like blind assistance tools. There's a lot of different things. And of course, you have QA. And I don't know how it's set up on your side, but we have some automated QA, but then we also have a QA team that has to run through stuff. So every little change that we push to production has to go through all these checks. And technically,
is that because when something goes wrong, they have to be able to go back to the exact person or the exact process where things went wrong? Because they say it's so hard to fire people in the government or whatever it is. Is that why all the bureaucracy? Is that why all the headache to make a simple change on a website?
No,
what's the logic there?
I think it makes sense for big changes, right? Because you hate to push up a website and then find that it has some major issue that you didn't foresee and causes all sorts of trouble. So, like, we have a list of rules to avoid these major failures, or, like I said, you have the Americans with Disabilities. So we have to make sure that the website also works for blind people and stuff like that, as much as we can accommodate them. We have to get waivers if we can't accommodate it and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I think for avoiding major problems, and then also, of course, the compliance with blind law and all that, disability law, that's why we have to go through all these checks. And a lot of times for us, if it's a simple tweak, we'll just, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but sometimes if it's a simple tweak, we'll just, you can kind of, as a developer, you kind of know when I make this change, maybe we might to rerun this test suite, but it's not going to really hurt anything else. So why bother going through the whole test suite, if you will? So that's not the official way to do it, but I think sometimes it's a smart way to do it. And I guess, like, if you're working as a private company, people can, make those judgment calls more easily. But if you're working with a government organization, the rules are the rules and you just do it, sometimes. And there's not as much room for judgment calls. I don't think, anyway. It doesn't seem like it to me. So, not officially. If you do make judgment calls, you're kind of, getting into some gray areas. So.
Yeah, I'll say this. I don't know about your applications you're working on, but most of the time, this problem shows up more when it's a public-facing application than when it's an internal application. So I'll give the government that because, of course, they want to avoid lawsuits. We talk about 508 and the Disability Act. The reason why the government is so adamant about making sure the website is accessible for folks with disabilities is because those folks can eventually sue the government if they go to, let's say, irs.gov. And they can't use the website, they can sue the government. And of course, some private organizations have also been sued. I've heard of, I think it was Domino's who got sued because their website was not, accessible enough for a blind person to go on there and order pizza. I don't know what happened to that lawsuit, but those are things they're trying to avoid, which makes sense. And of course, you don't want to put any verbiage on the website because if you don't phrase it well enough, people can find loopholes and eventually sue the government and get money from the government. So the lawyers get involved because they want to make sure that you're dotting all your T's and crossing all your I's. Dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes sense. There's a method to the madness. But the problem is it shouldn't take months or even weeks for a lawyer to say, hey, this is what is the case. But the problem is me as a contractor don't have direct access to the lawyer or the lawyers who are making these decisions. So I have to escalate it up to my PM, and my PM escalated up to the government PM, and the government PM escalated up to whoever his boss is, and then his boss escalated up until they finally get to the people that are the lawyers in the government that can say, hey, oh, this is what you want to do, phrase it this way. And just take a whole amount of time that is ridiculous. He's talking about moving a button. I'm talking about changing text, which a baby can do. So how do we make that more efficient? Maybe the government can plan a little bit better and get lawyers to give us their verbiage long before we start working on the website. I don't know. But what Godfell said here, I've been living it for years with government. And also the other thing is money. When you're contracted to do X, your company do not want you to do Y, even though Y makes sense, because they want to go back to the government and say, hey, Mr. Government, we need to do Y, so therefore we need to charge you another $100,000, $200,000, because there's no way in the contract that says we need to do Y. Again, waste, fraud, and abuse. Why is it that if a letter came out and it's not formatted properly, and it takes a developer less than 5 minutes to do, that they have to go back to the government and say, we want more money to format the letter properly? It doesn't make sense. In a private company, that would be done in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I guess I'll step down now, but that Godfell for you. All right, moving on. So I spoke earlier some of the pain points I have with Doge, and it is that real people are affected. People that have nothing to do with waste, fraud, and abuse. What say you? What is the recourse for these people?
Oh, wow. I think this is a little bit of a tough subject to talk about. So I can only speak about what I see myself, right? And where I work. Boy, good thing I don't need my job, because this could jeopardize a little bit. But I love my job. I love working it. But I do see a lot of obvious waste. And obviously Doge should help resolve that. And then I see a lot of less obvious waste. So there's some folks in the building where, okay, I used to work in a building. Since COVID, we've kind of been working out of our house. But just to go along with my work environment, I'll just refer to it as the building. So there are some folks in the building that they come in and they sit in their cubicle. They have a bunch of phone conversations. Many times it's not even with anybody, government or contracting or anything like that. It's personal phone calls. They're there for, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 6 hours. And then they check out, right? And well, I'm trying to think how much I want to go into what I've seen. I don't really know if I want to go much further, because it might start to point out some stuff, but that could come back and bite me. But anyway, I see a lot of situations where work is not getting done. And in some occasions, well, on many occasions, these are government workers and they can't, or it's very difficult to fire them, right? And so they're like, whatever, and it doesn't really matter. I still have my job. I've seen one person, they did end up getting removed from the project. I wasn't working this project, but I was observing it. They ended up getting removed from the project and getting put on some lesser, or just kind of like some other job that really didn't have anything to do with the project.
But they don't care because they get the same pay.
Exactly. Yeah. Got the same pay. And they pretty much at that point then officially had very little responsibilities. So they were just punching the clock, really. And that's all that's happening. So in that case, like Doge, at the very least, I'm hoping will encourage those people to start working, right? I don't want to see people lose their jobs per se, but maybe they could actually, earn their keep. But, there's a lot of folks on the contracting side too. I know in my area, we're starting to come under a little bit of pressure because there's scrutiny on how much is being spent on contracts and stuff like that. And so a lot of us, I hate to say it, we've been a little lazy, and I feel like we need to step up our game. Not all of us, but there's quite a few, even on the contracting side. And I've seen that more since COVID. Like, since we've been sent home, working from home, some of us try as best we can to do a really good job. And others, it seems to me, maybe they're not. And maybe I could be missing something, but it seems to me that there are a bunch of contractors that are just kind of not working so hard, And you can even look at it like, we do agile programming, and you can look at the numbers on the sprint and whatnot. And some of it is the government's fault because I don't feel like they communicate so well while we're out of the office. But some of it, I think, is the developers as well. And DOGE is putting us under pressure. And I think we're having to perform a little bit more, make a more compelling argument for why the contract should stay with us, or why we shouldn't be let go. So like in my case, I work with a contracting firm, and there have been a few people where they were going to get let go, but they were given an opportunity, and this is because of the DOGE cuts. They were given an opportunity to step up their performance, and as far as I'm aware, they have, and it looks like they're going to stay on the contract. So, I think that's a good thing. Nobody likes to go through that, but we can't spend like drunken sailors. Every dollar has to count for something. So,
right.
I mean, I hate to talk like that, but I think it's the reality. And I know for me, it's caused me I've always tried to do my best, but it's a little extra motivation. You want to be in the best position when contract negotiations are going to happen. So, yeah, everybody seems to be stepping it up a little bit, is at least where I am.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
because of DOGE.
Yeah, I will say though, I don't know if you were saying this, but I hate using Sprint and, JIRA numbers and all this stuff to judge performance. I don't think it gives a good, accurate impression of someone's performance, especially if you have a senior engineer helping a junior or new engineer.
Okay.
That doesn't show up on the Sprint board. Then the time when you give your points to a ticket, a lot of times it's arbitrary. It never really truly reflects the number of work in it. For many times, let's say a 5-pointer for me might be an 8-pointer for a junior or freshman engineer. So I just don't like that pointing system. And if DOGE is using that, I hope they have engineers that know that that stuff shouldn't be a mark for performance. But sadly, it's used many times for performance by not just the government, but by companies outside of government to judge how well you're doing. I always hate that. I'll give you one example. I know we're going to go off point here, but I remember one sprint I did I think it was 30-something points.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I did that amount of points was because when we were pointing the tickets, I told them, hey, these are not 3-pointers. These are by best 1-pointers. But they didn't listen to me. I was overruled. And I ended up and got a bunch of 3-pointer tickets. And I knocked them out. And I went back and got the rest, all of them, because all of them were similar. And guess what it was? It was simply a text change and update the name of a variable.
Oh, wow.
Why does that need to be a 3-pointer? So I did a bunch of those. I end up and get 30-something points in the sprint. And what does that do for the next sprint? Well, it shows off our metric because I'm not going to be able to do 30-something points every sprint. You know what I'm saying? So I don't like those numbers. But what I do notice about the government, though, as a federal contractor, I've seen that they have a lot of redundancy. In the times when I was I'm with a private company, so I'm not a federal employee. But what I've seen in private companies is that they don't have as many redundancies. For instance, I work with a company and there's this guy, he knows the system in and out. And if he drop over dead one day, nobody know what he knows, which is not the best way to do it. But a lot of private companies, that's what they have. There's this one guru that he better not leave the company. He better not get hit by a bus because the company's going to be in a limbo for a couple of months until someone else can learn what this guy knows. But in the federal government, you have a bunch of software engineers and everybody got to know the system. Then you have this other person in the government that can know the system. So if someone leaves, well, it goes back to what you're saying. If I have 5 people that can do the same thing that I do, I may not have any work to do. So I come to work and I sit on my phone and talk to my friends all day. Waste, fraud, and abuse. So it might be, where do we find the perfect redundancy? Is it 2 employees? Is it 3? Maybe it's not 5. But when I compare to what I see in the federal government to what I see in private sector, one of the big things I would say is that the private sector tend not to have as many redundancy because everybody in the private sector having the seat, they're paying a salary to. That's cutting into their overhead and cutting into their profit. But when you don't have to worry about overhead and profit because the money is not yours, the government say, oh, well, let's hire someone else. This person's not working to the standard they expect or pulling the old weight. Well, let's hire someone else. So I guess the question was, what are the recourse for some of these people that have been fired that have nothing to do with the waste, fraud, and abuse? I would say, sadly, I don't think there's much they can do or anybody can do because they might just be redundant in the case when it comes to the government. And one of the big thing I have, though, I do feel, even though on a high level, for most part, I do agree with DOGE. I think they're using a blunt machete and they're coming in and they're hacking away, or they're using the chainsaw that he got from the president of Argentina and they're hacking away rather than using a scalpel and kind of surgically remove the stuff. I think they're going a little bit too fast for my liking. And it's not just DOGE, it is the deportations, it is tariff. Everything coming at you so fast, you're almost getting whiplash. I kind of wish maybe slow down a little bit. But at the end of the day, they probably can't slow down because they probably have until midterms to get all of this done so things doesn't change. So I can understand one way, but that doesn't mean I really like it.
I think the American people really need to wake up and realize everything that you gentlemen have said, because we can't keep going on this track. We can't keep having these redundant people doing non-important work and unable to be fired and an ever-bloating, ever-growing government. It's not sustainable. We can't continue at a nearly $2 trillion deficit as a country. We can't keep doing that. And I think maybe that points back to the fact that America has, in large part, walked away from biblical principles because there is a theology of work. God has created every single person. And it's interesting. I think most people don't realize that God had Adam and Eve working in the garden before the fall. Like, work is not a result of the fall. Hard work, like work that brings about thorns and thistles, even though we try our best, is a result of the fall. But work was instituted before the fall. So work is good. And we should not, as people that are made in the image of God, whether you're saved or not, we shouldn't be okay with just being in a cubicle, making a few personal phone calls, like Sam was saying, and then going home and getting a full day's worth of wages for that. We should never be okay with that. We should want to do whatever it is God put us on this earth to do, and to do it with vigor and with joy and all of those things that come along with obeying God. And yet it seems like so many in our government, in our businesses, in our schools, in our fill in the blank, are okay with just showing up for a paycheck, or just showing up even if it's wasteful, even though it's fraud, even though it's abuse, even though it's poisoning the country that we live in, it's crippling and debilitating the country that we live in. We should not be okay with that as image bearers, as Americans, because it's not good for the country. Perhaps what we can do as Christians, perhaps what the church needs to kind of wake up and do, is to in some way disciple and teach the nation about the theology of work and why it's important and why we need to do our best and all of those different things. Now, how we go about doing that, that's certainly up for discussion. But
yeah, definitely. And I think that DOGE have definitely caused some harm, at least in my opinion. I'm thinking about the obvious would be, of course, people being let go, contractors who have lost their jobs. Remember, every employee, well, almost every employee, you're talking about the family that's behind of that employee that they're supporting. So, whatever the case may be, someone lost a job. It's not just them being affected, the entire family being affected. You can talk about also another harm for DOGE would be the political divide. It seems to be deepening a political divide in the country. And of course, you can talk about the hindrance to the gospel with this DOGE thing. I don't know about you, Sam, and where you at, but we were cursed out on a Saturday morning when we were evangelizing from a lady that assumed because we are Christians that we agree with Trump and we agree with DOGE. And she basically, basically said that we're not Christians because look at what Trump and DOGE are doing. And I can understand real families, again, are being affected. So what is real or perceived, there's definitely some stuff there. And of course, there were some people in USA that weren't participating in fraud. They really wanted to get medicine to some places that needed. They really wanted to help people. And now it's gone. So I will give them at least that 2 cents.
But I would argue that it's not really the government's business to send aid to any country, honestly. That's more of a charitable thing. The government's job, as our founders set it up, its job was really to establish order here in the United States and to keep foreign enemies, at bay. And then if you just look at, and I want to say we even had a debate. Wow, I wish I could remember what politician this involved. This is probably going back about 200 years or so, maybe not quite 200 years, but we would have debates as to whether the government should be involved in charity. And over again, the answer would be no, the
No.
federal government should not be involved in charity. And in fact, we considered it many years ago theft if the federal government was involved in charity. If there was somebody that was starving or somebody that needed help, then we as American citizens would get together and help that person, right? Through charitable means, not through the government. So to me, with the whole, I mean, it does stink that you might have people in another country that were used to counting on the federal government for aid, but really the federal government, from my vantage point, and I think history, American history, would agree, the federal government should not be involved in that. And we really need to get, our charities really need to be more involved. But it's also tricky, right? Because if we're paying so much in taxes, how are we going to have money to give to charity, you know?
Well, if you cut down the size of government, we won't have to pay so much tax. Perhaps that argument can be made too.
I think so.
If you feed someone crack and you get them hooked on it, in order to help that person turn around, you have to completely take the crack away. Some people make the argument for weaning them off of it, but yeah, it's going to be unpleasant. Yeah, it's going to be awful, withdrawals and everything, but it really needs to be done. And I think that this is a situation where, as a people, we are so accustomed to the government being so large and so, like, the tendrils are in every single facet of personal and political and spiritual life that we can't even imagine. Well, some of us can't imagine our country with such a pervasive government. When in reality, as Sam said, government was never that was never government's role. That was never their sphere of authority. They were there, like, what does the Bible say? To judge the wicked and for defense, reward the good and punish the evil, for defense, of course. But all of these things that we're so accustomed to the government doing and being are not its role. And I think to cut back, it's going to be very painful. And that's not just a financial statement. That's a huge cultural adjustment as well. All of these things flow from that fountain as well. And so, but it needs to be done. And I don't think that Trump's second administration is the only thing or the only effort that we should make as a people in order to address this problem. This has been a train wreck coming for a very, very, very long time. I don't want to be pessimistic and say that we can't do anything about it. I don't want to quite go that far, but some really drastic changes need to be made. In fact, I have a chart pulled open here. In order to address, to meaningfully address the deficit, we have to really talk about cutting some things that people are not going to be happy with. We're talking Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of these different things. They absolutely have to be cut. They're the largest pieces of the pie when it comes to spending. Social Security alone is $1.5 trillion. That's more than anything else. That's more than defense. It's more than Medicare, Medicaid. It's more than any of those things.
Well, Social Security should be self-funded, though. But sadly, because the government raised Social Security, it's not. But I agree with you guys on the level that the government should not, at least wasn't initially designed to do a lot of these things that the government is doing. But a little bit cautious because I don't want America first to become American only. And America has always been there to help. And I think that's a good thing to some degree. Of course, we know the Bible tells us that, hey, who should be supporting the widow and the widower? It should be the church. I get that. But America has moved so far away from its roots. If the Lord has blessed us with so much money and so much good, and there's a village in Africa that we can send $20,000 and feed them for 5 years, why not send them $20,000 and feed them for 5 years, hoping that their plight will turn around? I don't know. Maybe we could send missionaries along with that $20,000 as well. But I'm just weary of saying, hey, of course it's not America's responsibility to feed other nations around the world and protect other nations around the world. But just to use an example, if my neighbor kid come over to my home hungry, I have no obligation to feed that kid. He's not mine. But I want to think that I have enough excess so if a kid come over to my house hungry, that I can give them some food, whether I have him sit at the table with us and eat or whatever the case may be. I think.
But isn't that the reasoning behind DOGE, not behind DOGE, but behind the programs that DOGE is cutting right now? Their idea that we need to go to Pakistan and teach these people about our first world ideals, and even though these people do not want.
The problem, I think, with that was they were using it as a way to say, hey, become like America. So adopt the LGBT philosophy, adopt democracy, in which I have no problem with countries. I think democracy is a better government of the ones that I've seen. But you shouldn't be forcing people to give up their culture and their way of living just because they give them some money. Because as I said earlier, they're just going to acquiesce on paper, but they're not going to really do it in their culture.
So then why give the money at all then? There's no reason
I'm
to
saying if it is for a purpose of people that are in need. The U.S. government have always been doing this. Whether it is for military purposes or otherwise, they will give money so a hand wash hand. So why is it that we have military bases in all these other countries around the world? It's kind of hand wash hand kind of thing. So we get benefit, they get benefit.
A hand wash hand thing that is always subject to corruption, though.
That's true.
And I mentioned Haiti before. When you have the government working in hand with a lot of these so-called foundations, these NGOs that go, the money's never accounted for. And the heart change that's necessary for people to establish a government that glorifies God and uplifts people and provides for the betterment of everyone. You can't throw money at that and bring that up. You have to invest people and time, and that's where missionaries come in. I think Jeffrey Botkin, there's a lot that I don't agree with him on, but one of the things that he said that I really agree with is one of the worst things that we did as America is we sent our military into these countries, the Middle East or wherever, and we failed to send missionaries behind them in order to witness to people and change their hearts and turn them to Christ so that they can establish their own civilizations of, well, I don't want to say democracy, but the heart change can be there for them to affect their own change. America, I think, is coming to realize that we can't just keep throwing money at a problem wherever it may be in the world, whether it's here in our country or abroad. Then it just becomes a black hole and the issue is never resolved. So what we can do right now is cut it. It's a gangrene now. It's gout. We have to, well, you don't cut gout, but it's gangrene at this point. We have to cut it. We have to cut it. I don't see any other.
Yeah, but you cannot share the gospel with a hungry man. You know, if you're going to give the gospel to someone that's hungry,
then the church can feed the hungry man. It's really our job, you know.
That's true, but the church has failed dramatically in some of these respects. And I'm just simply saying...
The government's not going to hand out tracts.
That's true, but the government, to some degree, can help make the path a little bit clearer for the missionary to go. Again, I'm not necessarily disagree with you guys. I'm just simply saying that there's some nuance to this that I kind of feel we're looking over. Because if I go to, you mentioned Haiti as an example, and I'm sharing the gospel with a hungry family, it would behoove me to feed the family first before I share the gospel. I think the gospel will better receive if I feed them first. But if I don't have the resources to feed them, and my government can say, "Hey, MCG, you're down there, whatever the case may be, you can form an NGO, non-government organization. We will give you money, and then you can also share the gospel because they don't control it." AKA, that would be something like Samaritan Purse. Samaritan Purse got tons of money from USAID, but Samaritan Purse have also been doing a lot of good. And of late, if you have listened to, what his name, the leader there, I don't remember his name.
Who?
The leader of Samaritan's Purse.
Franklin Graham.
He has been on point with the gospel of late. So again, I might agree with Franklin Graham and everything he teaches, but I'm simply saying that's one example of working with the government and also sharing the gospel. And if you remove the barrier of hunger, remove the barrier of medicine, remove the barrier of whatever these people are having, so you can share the gospel a little bit easier, I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that.
Okay. You know how one time we had Pastor Todd on and he talked about how you could have two paths that look like they're going the same way, but because one is off ever just so little, you don't see how the path will differentiate until you get way on down the line and you see that they're completely different paths. It's the same thing with this thing that we're talking about here. If we take the approach that it seems like you're saying, then the people that come for the food or for the help or for the sustenance will only stay for those things. The gospel is not their priority, and we're not called to feed them. Okay, we're not called to feed them first. Firstly, we're not called to feed them. We're called to share the gospel with them and bless them through our efforts, whether it's food or sustenance or whatever. We just interviewed missionaries to Ukraine, and they're doing exactly that. But the priority is the gospel. The priority are hearts. The priority is the spiritual. The physical will follow. And it's just a natural result of showing them the love of Christ. And I think that maybe the way that our government presents itself to other countries, perhaps we should follow that same path. And I don't pretend to be able to explain how that would come about. And I'm not being Christian nationalist about it either. But I think we've tried the whole, feed the people and they will like to engage with you. It doesn't seem to work. That's the basis of nation building.
I don't know if I would say it doesn't seem to work. I would definitely have a problem sharing the gospel with someone who I know is physically hungry and I have the means that I could feed them and don't.
Oh, no. We're not saying that you shouldn't That's not what we're saying. At least that's not what I'm saying.
I'm not saying that the gospel is second priority and the first priority is to feed them. I'm just simply saying that the medicine, the food might be a barrier that we can remove so that they can get the gospel a little bit easier. The gospel is still the first priority. It's just that our path to get there might be a bag of grocery. Some Advil might be the path to get there. But the gospel is still the priority. And I think that's what Samaritan Purse is doing and other good organizations are the same. And I'm guessing what I'm saying, a lot of these organizations were also receiving funding from US aid to do a lot of these international work. And I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, for me, I'm opposed to that, honestly. But that being said, right, like if we have a choice, USAID give money to LGBTQ or give it to Samaritan's Purse, obviously I prefer Samaritan's Purse.
Sure.
But personally, I feel like the government really should not be in the business of charity. I see government being involved in charity as robbing the American people. The government's job is to take care of the American people. And the American people, especially if they are Christian, their job is to get the gospel out there. So it would be God talking to me, God talking to you, saying, hey, Sam, what are you doing to promote the gospel? And then on top of that, even in the Bible, it makes it clear, or at least to me, it seems pretty clear that we're supposed to take care of Jerusalem first, then Judea, and then the Samaritans, and then to the uttermost parts of the world. And so even if we just look at it that way, let's say it were the government's responsibility, the government is in many ways failing the American people, especially when we look at how much debt and the deficit that we're in every year. Yes, the deficit is $2 trillion. That means every year we're going $2 trillion more into debt. And that's not sustainable. I want to say that our biggest item is actually servicing our debt. And we spend more on servicing our debt than we spend on funding our military, if I remember correctly, than we spend on Social Security. That's a new thing, by the way. It wasn't that way. I think it wasn't even that way just like 6 or 12 months ago. But servicing our debt has now crossed over. And that's dangerous because if we don't correct this quickly, it's going to become a hole that we can't dig out of unless we completely, scrap our financial system and start all over, which is another, I would argue that is unbiblical too, because the Bible talks about how if we take out a loan, if we make a promise, right? If we have a debt and we make a promise to pay it, we should keep it. And so right now, I think the argument is if we, through DOGE or by some other similar action, if we cut the spending, then maybe we can pay off our debt like we gave our word. But if we don't get this under control, and I think the situation is more desperate than we recognize, if we don't get this under control, then, we're going to have to refinance the whole country, pretty much declare bankruptcy in effect. And then guess what? There will be no USAID at that point. And there will be a tremendous instability here at home. It could be a huge mess and we'll all potentially be poor. So even if you look at it that way, we have to cut the spending because pretty soon we won't be able to give anybody anything, so.
And it's a beast.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, it's a beast. We have to take a hatchet or what was it, a chainsaw to it. I think we're beyond the point of a scalpel right now. And DOGE, unfortunately, it's doing great work, but I think it's a scalpel. I don't think it's a chainsaw.
You seem like a machete to me, so, but anyways.
Somewhere in between, right?
Somewhere
a compromise.
Yeah, you're listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. We're sitting down with our recurring host, Sam, and we're talking about Trump, Musk, and DOGE. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for a consistent and reliable place to get all your Christian materials? Try ChristianBook.com. Started from humble beginnings in 1978, ChristianBook.com now offers a wide range of books, CDs, DVDs, homeschooling, and church supplies, plus more. So whether you are a parent, a homeschooler, a pastor, or a layperson, ChristianBook.com can be a one-stop shop for all your needs. Click the link in the description section below and check out the vast array of Christian materials ChristianBook.com has to offer.
All right, so we were talking about just before the break some of the harms or perceived harms of DOGE. Do you think some of these harms are overblown? Actually, let me play a clip from a lady that's talking about some of the perceived harms that folks are probably overblowing.
The DOGE report National Park Services. This has been highly requested, so I did a little bit of digging, because what is being put out is that there is just this massive blanket firing of 1,000 people, parks shutting down, hundreds of millions of dollars being cut. And it is happening, but not like they're making you think it's happening. So what is actually happening? Well, turns out when DOGE did a little bit of digging, they found that 650 million of our taxpayer dollars were going to straight administration fees. That is over 25% of the actual budget is not going to the park's improvements or the customer experience or the park goer's experience, straight to administration. Things like 3.5 million of our taxpayer dollars in the National Park Service was going to creating PowerPoints and meeting agendas and minutes.
Notice said that over $3 million going to PowerPoints, meeting agendas.
Okay, ChatGPT can do that for free in 2 seconds. Okay. So money saved. So that doesn't help the parks at all. They're also, yes, they are cutting staffing, but they're cutting staffing at parks that aren't actually visited very frequently. There is one example, Eugene O'Neill National Historic Site is very difficult to actually get to, and less than 10 people a day on average visit the site, and they have a full staff. They have shuttle buses and the things. Now, full staff means park rangers, the maintenance crew, the shuttle drivers. That's a lot of money for a park that doesn't really get visitors. It does not need full-time staff for that. So they're cutting that type of staffing. Also, they found that $22.3 billion of backed up maintenance tickets have been found. And on top of that, they just arbitrarily increased those costs by 35% with zero justification of the fees. And they just want us to pay it. It was almost $3.7 billion of our taxpayer money. And then finally, they're also shutting down a little bit of the land acquisition situation, because while the park services can't keep up with this $2.3 billion maintenance fee, they're out there buying more land for parks. Now, I'm all for parks. I love national parks. I actually used to travel in a camper all around to parks, so I absolutely love them. But they do need to be responsible with our money. I don't care. I want the park, yes, but you can't steal our money and not do right by the people you're taking it from and not actually having all this money go to the parks. Does that make sense? So there is your update on the National Park Service. You can decide if it's a good idea or not.
All right, so there you have it. She's talking about some of the harms that people are talking about are not really as drastic as, I guess, the media let on.
Well, naturally, we're going to see that in the news, right? Like we mentioned before, the people that are opposed to Trump himself, just because of who he is, they're opposed to Trump, they're opposed to Elon, they're going to take everything and put a negative spin on it in order to cast doubt and to encourage the American people to fight against the efforts of DOGE. I saw an article explaining how DOGE will take something that is only, say, $8 million in its savings and somehow frame it as though it were billions of dollars saved. And one thing that Americans don't have is a way to verify all of these things. Where would we even begin to go to verify if any of these claims, whether they're on the left or on the right, are true? I wouldn't know where to go. I would have to take what they tell me at face value. So if I'm only listening to the people on the left, I'm going to think that DOGE is a complete waste of time. If I'm only listening to people on the right, I'm going to think DOGE is the best thing ever. So what tools do we, the American people, even have in order to fact check and see what's actually being done so that we can do something about it if there were something to be done about it?
That's a good question. There are some sites. In fact, I'm on one right now, and I do have to make a correction. When I suggested that the interest that we're paying on our debt is greater than what we're spending on Social Security, that's what I was told by a radio talk show. Well, I'm on usdebtclock.org, and whether these numbers are accurate or not, I don't know. They look about right, but I'm looking at usdebtclock.org, and what they say we're spending on interest for our debt is about $1 trillion. I presume that's annually, because all these other numbers that they're looking at are annually as well. So defense spending is right now it's about 894 billion per year.
Oh, that's gone down.
What's that?
Oh, no, I was just remarking that went down, actually. It used to be in the trillions, not in the billions, you say?
No, it was around
No.
900 billion.
Oh.
Well, so it's been in the 800s for a little bit, but they're proposing to bump it up to $1 trillion, is what I understand, this upcoming budget. Social Security is 1.5, according to this website, 1.5 trillion. So that is way up there. And the biggest one, I didn't realize this, Medicare, Medicaid, according to usdebtclock.org, is $1.67 trillion per year on Medicare and Medicaid. So that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also do have a DOGE clock on this as well. And like I said, they say the source is U.S. Treasury when it comes to the DOGE numbers. So that's interesting.
Okay.
And right now they say that the DOGE clock, and this is constantly adjusting, but it's about $344 billion. Looks like it's about to tick over to $345 billion that just ticked, saved by DOGE, which they say is also about $3,000 per U.S. taxpayer that they've saved since DOGE has been started. So it's interesting.
Give me that number again. How much DOGE have saved?
$345 billion since the starting of DOGE, which was, 2 months ago?
Yeah, since January 20th, 2025, I guess you could say.
Okay. Was DOGE started then? I think it was a little bit after that.
Well, I'm just going on when Trump came in, but I think I've heard higher numbers for DOGE than that, though. But go ahead.
Higher than 345 billion saved? Or
Mm-hmm.
I don't even believe that DOGE has saved that much. Am I wrong?
Well, if you calculate basically over 900 million in contract canceled, I don't know if they consider that save money, but some of it is contract that was about to be awarded but never got awarded, or whatever the case may be, because DOGE stopped it. So I don't know if you can call it save because I guess the money wasn't being spent. I don't know how they calculate it.
I think that's part of the calculation, yeah. But 900 million would only be roughly $1 billion, you know?
Yeah.
Right. But I'm just saying that along with other stuff. But I guess you could be right. I kind of think that I heard higher numbers, but that's fine. The reaction to DOGE, though, because I think that sadly the political left have shown that if you don't agree with something, it's going to be turned into burning down buildings, it seems like now it's, well, let's harm Elon in whatever way. What's your feeling towards the reaction to DOGE, whether you agree with it or not? I think we had some little bit of disagreement here, but I don't think we're going to burn down each other's homes because we don't agree on everything USAID is doing.
Right.
It doesn't seem like an acceptable reaction to me.
Does it make sense to boycott Elon and his companies, Tesla especially? I guess they can't do much about SpaceX. I guess they can't shoot the rocket out of the sky.
I mean, I think a boycott is within anybody's right. So if anybody has an issue with DOGE or with Elon, it's their right to boycott. I don't have a problem with that. I disagree with them, obviously. I think that. But see, for me, the funny thing is, like, I wouldn't buy a Tesla anyway because I don't like the cars with all the computers that record all your information in it and all that and send it to satellites or send it to a cell phone.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that. And, even regular cars, they kind of do that. Like I have a Chevy Suburban and it has a satellite connection and it has a cellular connection and it does phone home. At least I've caught it phoning home before. I've ripped the communications out of my Chevy Suburban. It took me a month to figure out how all that worked, but I ripped it out. And so, but Teslas I think they're worse, when it comes to that. So I would never buy one. But if I did like Tesla, I wouldn't just start boycotting it because I think Elon's doing good work in this area.
They probably put one of those stickers on there. I got this Tesla before Elon went crazy.
Yeah. For me, I look at it the other way around. I thought of Elon as, he's been more liberal and now he's doing some good stuff. Maybe the area where I would worry is, Elon is the richest man in the civilian world. And I don't know how much I I think what he's doing right now is good, but humans are corruptible. And someday, let's say, well, we have Twitter. Twitter's possibly going to become the everything app. I don't really like that because that's one organization that can control, your payments. It can control, it's like a quasi government in a way, So I don't really like that. And there are other things that Elon Musk is doing that I don't really like. I'm not so keen on Neuralink. I think there's some good stuff you can do with Neuralink, but overall, I don't really like it. Why do I want a computer in my head that can be hacked, right?
Right.
Or that can send my thoughts to somebody else? Just not keen on that. But when it comes to cutting government spending, I'm behind that. I agree with that. But yeah, everybody has the right to protest whatever. I just don't like the whole thing where you start burning things down or threatening to kill people. That's where we have a problem.
I agree. There's a line there. There's protesting and then there's terrorism. If you are throwing Molotov cocktails and burning up Teslas and committing arson and doing all of these different things, that's not protesting anymore. That's criminal. That's terrorism.
Yeah.
And the definition of terrorism, which I think would fit, perhaps this is a slippery slope. I need to be careful about this. But if you are using any type of violence in order to scare, manipulate, or otherwise entice people to behave a certain way or to feel or think or believe a certain way, that's beyond the realm of negotiation. You know, America always says we don't negotiate with terrorists. If you say, I don't agree with Elon, I don't like what he's doing, and so if you don't agree with me, or in order to make you believe or agree with me, I'm going to wreak havoc and burn this Tesla or throw a Molotov cocktail in this area. It's the same thing that people were doing in 2020 when they wanted us to believe that white cops were hunting down black men. What did they do? They burned the cities down. They instilled fear. They terrorized people into not speaking up or not opposing them. We saw it happen with the trial, with Derek Chauvin's trial, where people what were they doing to the jury? Intimidating the jury and actually making credible threats. Some of them even tried to. They were following the bus. They were throwing things at the jurors in order to bring about a certain result. All of that, you're in terrorism realm at that point. In my humble opinion, we don't negotiate with people like that. And I think that we really need to, as a people, understand what the line is between protesting and terrorism. And I think that a lot of these people that are against Trump or against Elon, against DOGE, if their only method of interacting or affecting change is to terrorize people, they need to be arrested. They need to be put in jail. They need to be held to the highest expression of the law, because as Americans, we don't do that. That's not how we're supposed to operate.
Yeah, I have a clip here where Elon was being interviewed about DOGE on Fox News. I'll play this and then we'll get your reaction.
Liberal Tesla lover here. My sister has two in her family, so have not thrown any Molotov cocktails recently, but I wanted to talk to you about what DOGE has been doing. So you've been making cuts to a lot of the agencies that have open investigations and regulatory battles with your companies. At the same time, you continue to get billions in government contracts. Tesla gets billions in subsidies. How do you explain that to the American people?
Well, everything that DOGE does is an open book. So I think the most transparent the most transparent organization in government ever. Every single DOGE action is listed on the doge.gov website. It's also listed on the X handle. So if anyone has a concern about any one of those actions, they can bring that up. They can raise that. And I do want to say, like, sometimes we make a mistake. Nobody bats 1,000. We will at times make a mistake, and make a mistake. We'll act very quickly to correct it. I am under such an extreme spotlight, so much scrutiny, that it's literally impossible for me to get away with anything nefarious. And obviously, nor do I wish to. So this is a case where we have radical transparency. We're actually willing to admit that we do make mistakes. Often people are not willing to admit they make mistakes, but we are. But we want to emphasize we fix them quickly, and we're trying to do the right thing for the American taxpayer, for the American people. And I think history will be the judge that what we've done here and what we're doing is a very good thing for the strength and future of America.
Your reaction to what you just heard, Sam?
I'm inclined to take Elon Musk at his word in this case. I do know that he does have personal interest, especially when it comes to things woke and the promotion of LGBTQIA type stuff. He's not so interested in that because they castrated one of his sons. The woke mob did, and he's not happy about that. So ever since that happened, he's vowed personally he was going to do everything he could to stop that. And I think that DOGE is one of the ways that he's doing that. Some people may not be happy about that, but I think in our case, we probably agree with that, you know. But either way, I mean, why should the government be spending money? If you want to promote LGBTQIA+, let it be done through political charity type stuff. It should be private funds, not government funds that does stuff like that. So, yeah, I think he's interested. I think he is interested in cutting the expense. And also, of course, like I mentioned earlier, he's the biggest taxpayer in American history. So that would be another incentive for him to cut unnecessary government spending.
Yeah, I do have some concern about Elon, but it's not necessary because of Doge. So
yeah,
I don't even think it's worth bringing up. But, and of course, I can see a conflict of interest, especially since he does have government contracts, especially with SpaceX, and I think with Tesla as well. Of course, he's making electric cars, so the government is interested in that. But I don't necessarily have much of a problem with him in terms of what he's doing with Doge, or even his government contracts. I guess it's more what I'm seeing from his personal life in the news, which, quite honestly, that's his life. I disagree with it. But the relationship between Trump and Musk, do you think this is a expression of fascism?
Oh.
What do you think?
If you're asking me, that's a tough question. I think, so first of all, my understanding of the definition of fascism is when the government gets different private companies involved in carrying out the government's agenda, right?
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, if you ask me, I think that the American government has exercised fascism on many occasions for a long time, certainly since World War II. And I think you might even be able to find examples before that. But when it comes to like Defense Production Act, I think that's the right name, that's legalized fascism here in America, where the government can say, all right, Ford, you're going to take your factory that you use to make cars and you're going to make parts for bombers or for, military equipment or whatnot. And Ford has to do it, right? According to the Defense Production Act. And, the government can take over essentially factories all across America and make them do what it wants to do. The argument is for the sake of winning a war, we have to do it. But whether it's right or wrong, I think that's an example of fascism. Fascism has like a stigma to it or like some kind of like an implied idea. But just looking at it technically, what is the definition of fascism? I think that's an example of fascism. We saw fascism again when it came to COVID. When the Defense Production Act was actually employed, we took Jack Daniels, right? And we told them, hey, instead of making alcohol for drinking, we're going to make alcohol for sanitizing. And so Jack Daniels did. And many other companies, I want to say we had several companies making, what do you call them? Those machines that help people breathe, ventilators.
Ventilators, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was an example of fascism. So in my mind, I kind of struggle. I kind of look at Trump and I like a lot about Trump. But to me, him, along with maybe some of the Roosevelts, to me, Trump is one of the more fascist presidents in American history. I'm not saying he's a Nazi. I think he's the opposite of a Nazi. But I think when it comes to government style, it's a more fascistic style.
I'm surprised you said that, Sam.
Yeah, well, I think it's just telling the truth. And I'm not necessarily in favor of it. However, when it comes to DOGE, I don't see that as an example of fascism all by itself, because the whole idea is we're cutting government spending. And so that's a lot of companies that we're not, if anything, we're cutting back what we're spending on these companies. So it's hard for me to call DOGE an example of fascism. But if you wanted to make the argument that maybe Trump has a style of leadership with the government that's more fascistic, I think you could make that argument. So, but I just don't think that DOGE is a good example of that.
Yeah, well said. I think it's only this time around, though, because this is Trump 2.0. He was not like this in his first administration. It seems that after the assassination attempt, after they came after him with the nation's legal system, I think he saw that this is a beast. We have to cut the head off. And he's going scorched earth. He can't run for a third term.
Well, not according to him.
Well, FDR did it. Wasn't it FDR that was...
That was before the amendment. Yeah,
before the amendment,
I think it was FDR.
So he knows that this term is the only time that he's going to be able to do it, and so he's acting accordingly. I don't think that under normal circumstances he would be quite this, for lack of a better word, extreme. And I feel like perhaps he feels like there's no other choice. He's got to take a hatchet to it, or like you said, MCG, a machete to it, while he still can.
No, a dull, blunt machete.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite...
That sounds like a billy club then.
I don't think it's quite like that. But there are some elements of fascism, I would say. It looks, some things that could look fascistic, but I don't think that we could call it fascist at all, because a fascist government is headed by a dictator. Well,
if you ask the Democrats,
they would say that he is one, but what dictator have you ever heard of in your life that has limited or reduced his own power or reduced the size of the government? That's not a thing. So they might call it.
I would argue our first president under our current Constitution, George Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, you might say, well, he wasn't quite a dictator, but he had people wanted him to be king, right,
Sure,
of
yeah.
America.
Yeah.
And he said, no, he doesn't want that kind of power, I don't know. But yeah, you're right. It is rare that you see somebody that could be an autocrat.
And there are other presidents in our history that have done worse. I mean, Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus for crying out loud. I mean, that doesn't hold a candle to what Trump is doing right now.
But here's the pushback, though. If I'm a bleeding Democrat, the argument I would make is this. Yes, he's making cuts. But the cuts he's making are cuts that would have put checks on him or allow the government to do things that he doesn't want the government to do, like USAID or whatever the case may be.
But that's the job of an executive. An executive's job is to make decisions on where we spend money,
Touche, but that would be the argument from the Democrat. And to some degree, they might have a point. Maybe that's a big one.
How's that fascism, though?
Everything is fascism to them, though. Everything is Nazi. Everything is fascism. Everything is racism. Everything is everything to them. Well, these words have lost meaning. But go ahead.
I agree. I think the word has been thrown out too much. But to Jay's point, though, can DOGE really do what they set out to do? I'm thinking that the only how DOGE is going to be successful, but the way I'm judging success is permanent, is if someone like Ron DeSantis, J.D. Vance, Vivek Ramaswamy get an opportunity to win the next general election. Because Trump can say all he wants. I don't see how it's going to be constitutionally possible for him to be able to be president for a third term. Now, if we go off of what he said, if J.D. Vance run and then decide he's going to, hey, I don't want to be president, and Trump is his running mate, and then Trump become president, you're talking about, okay, can't be president for more than 2 terms. Well, Constitution elected. And also the Constitution also lay out the priorities of what you have to be a president. Of course, you have to be 35, you have to be natural born citizen and stuff like that. So I guess they can look at all these things and say, okay, maybe. I don't see how it's constitutionally possible that he can run again. So my point is this. If a Democrat wins the next general election, for most part, all what he would accomplish for DOGE would go for naught, because all these things are going to come back roaringly so, because the people will say, we want them back, because too many people have lost their jobs, too much uncertainty with all the tariff. The deportations have cut into labor that I wanted. If you go to the Democrats and Jasmine Crockett, the labor I wanted to clean my house, which as an immigrant, I'm offended about that. But anyways, but I'm simply saying, in order for any of these to be successful, meaning permanent, the Republicans have to win, I would say, at least the next 2 general elections.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the next 2 presidential elections, I think, will be crucial. I think before that, so it seems to me that DOGE has an immediate job, which is to cut the spending that we're doing now. And it seems to me that they're being partially successful with that. And then when it comes to cutting, for instance, the credit cards, right? Like, I actually know people in the government that no longer have their credit card. They're fussing quite a bit about it. Actually, technically, their credit cards haven't been cut, is what I'm hearing from them. The line hasn't been cut, but they can only have a balance of $1, right?
Oh, wow.
So because Trump tried to cut it, but then the courts put a stay or something, they limited him, at least temporarily. They're saying you can't cut the line. So then Trump's like, okay, fine, I'll keep the line, but I'll change the limit to $1. So there you go. Right. So anyway, and that's just the specific scenario that I'm hearing at my job. Right. So it may be that he did cut a bunch of lines elsewhere. I don't know about that personally. But yeah, it seems to me that DOGE is accomplishing the immediate cuts to some degree. But once the president changes, those cuts are gone. Right. And that money can be spent again. So we need Congress, House and Senate. They need to pass laws to make those cuts permanent. But of course, you still have the problem, and that is, you also need a president and a Congress going forward to keep making cuts and to keep watching our spending to actually resolve this problem. Because right now, we have a deficit, and Trump can do a little bit about that, and Congress helping him can really help do more about it. but we still have a huge debt, right?
Yeah.
And not only do we have to get rid of the deficit, but we also have to get rid of the debt. Let me see if I can go back to the debt clock. Maybe I killed that website, but it's huge. Okay, here it is. It's $36.7 trillion. Actually, if you round it up, it's $36.8 trillion, our current debt, right? So it's going to take a while. Like you're saying, it'll take a while. Even if Doge is successful in the immediate, it'll take a while before we'll actually be able to cut our debt back down to something reasonable. It's hard for me to believe that, just 20 years ago, we had no deficit, I want to say, or maybe a little past 20 years ago. During the Clintons, I want to say we balanced.
Yeah, the last president that we had.
Just 30 years ago, Sam.
Yeah, 30 years ago was President Clinton.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well,
and I don't think Americans
just a little while ago, it was 20 years ago, so time is flying.
I don't know if Americans will have the stomach for what needs to be done in order to bring the deficit down. It's going to take a lot of painful choices, painful cuts, maybe a reduction in our standard of living. There's going to be quite a bit that we're going to have to endure, and we might not want to do that. But
as we wrap this up, what would you say the takeaway from all of this? We've been talking about this, all that stuff, but what would you say are the takeaway, whether spiritual or political or physical? What are some of the takeaways that come to your mind from all of this, Sam?
Well, wow. Well, I mean, so how did we get here, right?
That's a good question.
That's a great question.
And I think it's when we want a free meal, everybody's like, oh, I want this person in power because they're going to give me a free meal, or they're going to give me this, or they're going to give me that. And I think ultimately, that's corruption at the lower level. I want the government to take money from this guy who's working hard and give it to me.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you go out and earn it, right? And I know not everybody can, but a lot of us can work. If you can work, go out and earn a living. Don't try to take it from other people. And the Bible even talks about that. For instance, 2 Thessalonians, really it's 3:7. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 7 to 11, I would say, kind of covers that. The highlight would be verse 10. This is probably what a lot of people are familiar with. For even when we are with you, this we command you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat, right? And I think verse 7, if you start with verse 7, it gives a little bit more context because it sounds a little harsh, but it seems to me that part of the message in this is we as Christians are a bad testimony if we go to somebody and want another man's bread and we want it for nothing. We won't labor. Verse 7 kind of talks about how we want somebody else's food, but we won't labor for it. We won't work day and night, but instead we just want to take somebody else's stuff. We shouldn't do that. If you want to eat, you should work, Obviously, like I said, that doesn't, what about a baby? Well, a baby's not going to be working, but able-bodied people, they should work if they want to eat. And we've gotten away from that. I think that's a form of corruption at the personal level. And if we're going to push the government to fulfill our corrupt desires, then the politicians are going to take that as an opportunity to fulfill their corrupt desires. And money is going to, not be spent very well. We're hurting ourselves. I think that's how we got here. And we need to fix it. There may be drastic change that needs to take place at the government level, and DOGE may be trying to do that. But ultimately, we as Americans need to fix our heart and work for our food, and not be lazy bums, which we like to be. So
I would definitely agree with everything that Sam just said. The change has to come through God's work on the heart of the American. Let me just say it like that, because our Constitution, our founding documents, everything that is so American doesn't say we the people for nothing. James chapter 1 says, well, let me just read a few verses here.
While you're looking for it, I do think that it's good, right, as Christians, for us to look out for people in difficult situations.
Yeah.
So that's totally different. But I've known several people who've been in a bad situation, and the ones that seem to have done the best, they're like, wow. Some of them have, even a neighbor, he ended up in a bad spot. And in his case, he wasn't going to just take charity. People did give him money, but then he's like, can I clean your yard? Can I this? Can I that? Can I do anything for you? And he really did put in a lot of hard work, and he's now in a much better spot. He actually was homeless for about a year, which is a long time, but he is a hard worker, and he's back on his feet. He's not taking a government check. He's actually working for his food and for his stay. I think he's going to, do well in the future. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sam. The verse I was looking for is James chapter 1, verse 17, and also Proverbs 10:22. I'll read them both. James 1:17 says, "Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning." Proverbs chapter 10, verse 22 says, "The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow to it, or sorrow with it." The Lord doesn't change. And so if he said in his word that a certain thing will bring about blessing and will bring about a prosperity, it will be the same and it will be true in 2025. So many people would like to say that the Bible is no longer relevant and that it has nothing for us. But the Bible is very clear that work and avoiding debt and everyone striving to do their own individual best, helping where they can, of course, but not relying on someone to provide for your sustenance. The Bible is very clear that this is the path to prosperity and this is the path to blessing. But when we start taking on debt and borrowing and spending money that we don't have and creating all of these programs that have a form of helping others or being a blessing to other people, but in reality, it creates or it encourages a vice in whatever form that may be. None of those things come from God, and none of those things will tend toward prosperity. And I think that as a nation, we're seeing that right now. When the Lord blesses something, every gift that he gives us, there is no added sorrow to it. You're not going to, like we talk about loan sharks, for example, right? You borrow $1 and have to pay back like 50 or something. Yeah, they gave you $1, but you're digging yourself into a deeper and deeper hole. And I think that our government and our politicians and our culture, all of these things are an expression of the people. And so we have to look at ourselves individually in order to see, just like Sam said, what can we do to repent before the Lord and live as he has laid out in his word in order for us to bring about the really big changes that we want to see. Like in this particular podcast, we're talking about our government and where all of the fraud, waste, and abuse comes in. DOGE is doing what it can, but the American people need to be doing everything that we can.
Yeah, and my takeaway would be this phrase, the urgency of the hour. And I think President Trump, Musk, and his team do see the urgency of the hour in terms of that they feel and they have gathered facts and they acted. They said, hey, the government is spending too much money, where the deficit is too high, there's too much waste, fraud, and abuse. They saw something and they acted. And the Bible tells us in John chapter 4, verse 35, say not he, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look unto the fields, for they are white, already to harvest. I guess what I'm saying here is truly that Jesus spoke those words then, and it's true now, that we need to lift up our eyes and look at the fields, for they're white, already unto harvest. In some respect, that's what DOGE did. DOGE looked, and they said, hey, federal government, hey, American people, we're wasting too much money in our government. And they acted. My challenge here is for Christians to also look and act. Because the Bible talks about in Lamentation, Jeremiah said how his eyes affected his heart. We needed to honestly cut the fat and go back to the basics of gospel. So many times in our churches today, we are more involved in entertaining than presenting the gospel. Church has become a show and all these things. Maybe we need to cut the fat and go back to the base of the gospel. Maybe we need to go back to the streets and start preaching, open air preaching. Maybe we should start going knock on more doors. Maybe we need to start being more of a light and salt in our communities. Because to some extent, what's my takeaway? The urgency of the hour. And the urgency of the hour really want to tell people, hey, you are sinners and you're in need of a savior. And of course, you can go to Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Of course, going down the line there, the gospel presentation have been made so many times in our episodes here and removing barriers. But just to Christians, I guess my question is, do you see the urgency of the hour? To me, to some extent, Elon Musk and Trump seeing the urgency of the hour and saying, America, we're heading for a cliff and we're going to fall over it if we don't do anything. And I'm saying there are a lot of unsafe people out there who are heading for a cliff and they're going to fall in the pits of hell if we don't see the urgency of the hour and share the gospel. All right, Mr. Sam, it's always a pleasure. We'll definitely have you back. And I see you got a new headset. You sound pretty good.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Removing Barriers podcast.
MCG, Jay, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. Make sure to rate us everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Stitcher. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross.
Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us, to support this podcast, or to learn more about removing barriers, go to removingbarriers.net. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.